Welcome back to O'Connor Tonight. And while the left likes to claim it's the conservatives and the right that are attacking our institutions, I don't think I've ever seen anybody attack the Supreme Court more than the radical left. They say that it's corrupt. They say that it doesn't represent the will of the people. They specifically attack Clarence Thomas, a black man, which I was under the impression that was verboten in leftist circles, that the fact that he was black made him basically untouchable, but different rules for them, of course. Here to talk to us a little bit about the attacks on SCOTUS is Mike Davis. He's the founder and president of the Article 3 Project. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So Clarence Thomas is taking a lot of flack from the radical left over something. It doesn't really seem like it affects his jurisprudence, but they seemingly keep attacking him, mostly, I think, on the basis of his decisions and his opinions. Is that correct?
That is correct. The Democrats have hated Clarence Thomas for decades since he escaped their plantation. He is a black man who thinks for himself, and that is very dangerous. They're going after Clarence Thomas because he helps out a college scholarship nonprofit charity, a 501c3 that's given out $245 million worth of college scholarships to 35,000 deserving kids since 1984. And that's the latest attack against Clarence Thomas. Absolutely.
Now, I think that's so essential, too, that he is working with charities. He is working with good organizations that are trying to make things better. The other thing, too, is that there's this idea that his opinions are maybe being tainted by his relationships with people like Harlan Crow. I don't think Clarence Thomas's jurisprudence has changed one single bit from when he started to when he ended, whereas based on how you look at the sort of leftist judges, they could flip at the top of a hat depending on what the Democrats want.
Yeah, so Clarence Thomas has had the same jurisprudence for over 30 years. He used to write lonely dissents, 8-1 lonely dissents, and President Trump appointed Justice Gorsuch, my former boss, Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Barrett, and transformed the 5-4 left of center court to the 5-4 Clarence Thomas court. We have the first constitutionalist majority on the Supreme Court in more than 90 years, and that's why the Democrats now want to destroy the Supreme Court. They didn't want to destroy the Supreme Court 5 years ago, but now that they've lost control of it, they want to destroy it.
Absolutely. I think that word there is so important too. Constitutionalist. What should be guiding the justices as they make their decisions but the Constitution, right? The document to which they've all sworn solemn oaths. It seems to me that if the Constitution gets in the way of what the Democrats are doing, specifically President Joe Biden, it's sort of just a paper shield. It's a piece of paper that they can throw away as they want. How should the Supreme Court be responding to these attacks from the left? Should they be indulging in them at all? Should they be just sort of going about their business, or do they need to respond?
The Supreme Court's already responded. They put out this unusual 9-0 statement to the public explaining their ethics rules, the statutory rules, their internal processes, how they run these ethics issues by their law clerks, their colleagues, the ethics lawyer at the Supreme Court, and then the general counsel at the administrative office of the courts. There is no ethics problem at the Supreme Court. The Democrats are making up ethics problems because, again, they lost control of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the last line of defense that protects everyday Americans from government tyranny and anarchy. And that is the last line of defense. That it's the one institution, it seems, in America that the left does not control, so they want to delegitimize and destroy it.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked about this a couple of times on the show, but this is the idea of court packing, right? Where you would see the number of justices on the Supreme Court changed as a result of legislation or as a result of the president saying, I want to get my legislation done. We've talked to a number of people who said that doesn't seem likely. But let's say, for example, the Senate remains in Democratic hands, and if 2024 goes the way of the Democrats, the president is able to remain in the White House. Would we see those types of attacks on the legitimacy of the Supreme Court mount? And theoretically, could he propose some form of legislation that would stack the court?
Absolutely. We've had 9 justices on the Supreme Court since 1869, more than 150 years ago, right after the Civil War. The Democrats have tried court packing in the past with FDR. The Democrats are proposing court packing now. It was in the 2020 Democrat National Committee Party platform. There is no question that if Democrats keep the Senate, keep the White House, and win back the House, they will nuke the legislative filibuster, lower the vote threshold in the Senate from 60 to 51, and they will pack the Supreme Court. There's no question about that. They are already encouraging the Democrats, the White House, the Biden Justice Department are already encouraging illegal obstruction of justice campaigns, threatening and intimidating Supreme Court justices outside of their homes, which led to a 1 a.m. assassination attempt against Justice Kavanaugh, his wife Ashley, and their 2 teenage daughters. These are not our parents or grandparents, Democrats. These are leftists. They don't care about norms. They don't care about institutions. They only care about power. And that's why the 2024 election is so critical.
Right. Mike, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because before I was working with O'Connor Tonight, I was a journalist that was working out on the streets and watching these protests go down. I would cover them endlessly, and they were rough. It was really scary to witness this happening. If the police presence hadn't been as large as it was, I shudder to think what would have happened to Justice Kavanaugh. I could very well imagine a world where we had an assassinated Supreme Court justice. Mike, one of the things that we've talked a little bit about the history of the court and how it's come under fire in the past. I remember Andrew Jackson maybe apocryphally said, the Chief Justice has made his decision, now see him enforce it. What is the mechanism under which SCOTUS can maybe respond to some of these things? You mentioned they put out a statement, but is there anything more that they can do to sort of put the legislative branch and the executive branch in line when they attack the legitimacy of the institution?
Well, that's an important point. The legitimacy of the Supreme Court depends on the public's perception of the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. And they, like you said, they can't enforce their own decisions. You have to have the executive branch enforce decisions, whether it's the U.S. Marshals or some other part of the executive branch. And the Democrats know this. That's why they're trying to delegitimize the Supreme Court. And so they've even suggested that there are Democrat politicians who have even said that the executive branch should ignore Supreme Court decisions with which these Democrats do not agree. That is a very dangerous path that we're going on. But I would say this to the Democrats. A political novice in 2016 upset Hillary Clinton over a Supreme Court fight. 4 Senate Democrats got sent into early retirement in 2018 when Democrats won the House over a Supreme Court fight. If Democrats want another Supreme Court fight in 2024, I welcome it, because they're going to lose it like they've lost these Supreme Court fights in the past. And I think the crucial question in 2024 is, do we want President Trump or President Biden replacing conservative Supreme Court justices?
Absolutely. Well, 30 seconds here, Mike. I'm very curious, as we look towards the future, what should people be paying attention to? Is there any sort of case that's coming up that's going to be a fire thrower, that's going to be something that's going to need attention?
Well, next term, you're going to start to see the Supreme Court go on probably a 30-year path where they're going to start containing the federal government, and particularly the executive branch, into what they're supposed to do, which is to enforce the law. Right now, you have these unelected bureaucrats and these administrative agencies writing the law, adjudicating the law, executing the law, or not executing the law. They have turned the Constitution on its head, and it's the job of the Supreme Court to get the federal government back in line.
Absolutely. Well, fingers crossed they're able to do that. Mike Davis, founder and president of the Article 3 Project, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, one more segment coming up. Don't want to miss it. O'Connor Tonight on Salem News Channel.